before you even think about looking away. Drop a comment with your city or country right now. I want to see how far this story travels. If it hits you, hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what happens next in this story is the kind of thing you cannot walk away from halfway through. The morning Raphael Orsini walked into her bakery, Maris Quinn was wrist-deep in dough and already running late. He didn't buy anything. He stood at the counter with his hands folded in front of him like a man who had never needed to ask for anything in his life. And he looked at Owen, her 7-year-old, her whole reason for breathing, with the kind of attention that made the hair on Maris's arms stand straight up. "Cute kid," Raphael said. He left without ordering, left without explaining why he'd come, and Maris stood there with flour on her hands and ice in her chest, knowing, not suspecting, knowing, that something she'd spent 7 years running from had just found her address. She just didn't know yet how long it had already known. Part 1. The bakery opened at 5:30 in the morning, and Maris was always there by 4. That was the deal she had made with herself years ago, when she first signed the lease on the small commercial space on Callan Street, the kind of street where foot traffic was slow before 7 and the rent was low enough that a woman raising a child alone could make the math work if she was careful. She was always careful. Careful had kept her alive. Careful had kept Owen safe. Careful was the only thing she had learned to trust after everything else had burned. The neighborhood was called Mercer Heights, which was a generous name for what it actually was. A corridor of older brick buildings wedged between a freight corridor and a public school, the kind of place the city planners forgot about, and the residents quietly preferred it that way. Maris liked it. She liked that no one asked questions. She liked that her customers, the early construction workers, the night shift nurses coming off 12-hour rotations, the retired men who sat at her 2 small tables for an hour with a coffee and a roll, were people who understood that some mornings you didn't want to talk. You just wanted something warm that someone made for you. She was good at making things warm. That was the other deal she had made with herself a long time ago, when she first started to understand that the life she'd imagined wasn't the life she was going to get. She couldn't give Owen a father. She couldn't give him a big house or summer vacations or the kind of ease that comes from not having to think about money. But she could give him bread. She could give him a kitchen that smelled like butter and brown sugar before the sun came up. She could give him a mother who got up every morning without fail, who never let him see her cry, who packed his lunchbox with a note inside and sometimes hid a small piece of almond cake underneath the sandwich, just because it made him grin. Owen grinned like she couldn't stand it, like it physically hurt her to look at him sometimes, because of the eyes. She had told herself over the years that the resemblance wasn't as strong as she thought, that she was just tired or projecting, or that grief could make you see things that weren't there. But Owen's eyes were gray. Not blue-gray, not gray-green, but a particular shade of silver that she had only ever seen in one other face. A face she had taught herself not to think about. And every time Owen looked up at her from across the kitchen counter, holding a measuring cup with both hands, and waiting for instructions with that bottomless, patient attention of his, she had to swallow something that lived just below her sternum and breathe through it and keep moving. She had gotten very good at breathing through things and keeping moving. That Thursday morning in November, she was working the second rise on a batch of sourdough when Owen padded out of the back room in his socks. He was not supposed to be up yet. He was supposed to be asleep for another hour before she walked him to school, which was 3 blocks east and 1 block north, a route she had walked with him enough times that she was pretty sure she could do it with her eyes closed and her hands full. "You're up," she said, not turning around from the counter. "I had a dream," Owen said. He climbed onto the stool at the far end of the prep table and put his chin in his hands. "A good one?" "Weird one." He watched her work. "There was a man in it. A big one. He had a coat on." Maris kept her hands moving. "People in coats, very dramatic." "He was standing outside the window," Owen said, "just watching." She stopped. Just for a second. Then she picked up the bench scraper and went back to working the dough. "Dreams are weird," she said. "You want a piece of yesterday's brioche while you wait?" Owen accepted the brioche without complaint, which meant he was still half asleep and hadn't fully engaged his capacity for negotiation. He ate it slowly, watching her, and after a few minutes his eyes got heavy again and he folded his arms on the table and put his head down on them. And that was where he was, asleep in the warm kitchen, brioche still in one hand, when the rain started outside and the first black car turned onto Callan Street. Maris heard the engine before she saw the headlights. There was something about it that didn't belong. Most of the early traffic on Callan was delivery trucks, their diesel engines grinding through the gears as they navigated the narrow street. This was different, quieter. Multiple vehicles, moving slowly. She went to the small window beside the front door and looked out. 3 black SUVs. No plates she could read from this angle. They had stopped across the street, and for a long moment nothing happened. They just sat there in the rain with their headlights on, engines running, and the street empty except for them. Then the front door of the middle vehicle opened. The man who stepped out was tall and broad-shouldered and moved with the kind of deliberate stillness that Maris associated with men who never had to hurry because the world rearranged itself around them. He wore a dark coat. His hair was black and wet within seconds of stepping into the rain. He looked up and down the street with the unhurried attention of someone who was not afraid of whatever he was looking for. Then he looked at her bakery. Then he looked directly at the window where she was standing. Maris stepped back from the glass. Her heart was doing something complicated. She pressed one hand to the counter behind her to steady herself and stood very still and tried to breathe through the thing under her sternum, tried to apply the 7 years of practice she'd built up, tried to tell herself that it wasn't possible, that she was exhausted and the rain was distorting things, and that the shape of a man's shoulders in a dark coat meant nothing. The front door of the bakery opened. She had not locked it yet this morning. She always locked it until 5:30. She had forgotten. She had been distracted by Owen being up early, by the dough, by the ordinary machinery of the morning, and she had forgotten to lock the front door, and now it was opening. The man walked in. He was taller inside than he had looked from across the street. He stopped just inside the threshold and pulled the door closed behind him, and for a moment he just stood there, dripping on her floor, looking at the room, taking inventory. The way he did it, systematically, without expression, told her everything she needed to know about what kind of man he was. "We're not open yet," Maris said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I know." He looked at her. "I need a few minutes out of the rain." Something slammed into the back of Maris's memory so hard she nearly grabbed the counter again. The voice. Low, unhurried, the slight rasp of someone who had spent years making himself understood in loud rooms. She had not heard that voice in 7 years. She had spent 7 years telling herself she'd forgotten it. She had not forgotten it. Maris. He said her name like he wasn't sure it would still work, like he was testing a door he'd been told was bricked over. "Don't," she said. "I'm not here to—" "Don't!" Her voice cracked. She hated it. She pressed her back against the counter and looked at him across the small room and tried to remember how to be the woman she had built herself into over 7 years of early mornings and careful budgeting and deliberately not thinking about this face. "How did you find me?" "I didn't," Dante Viscari said. "Not the way you mean. I wasn't looking for you. I was—" He stopped, ran a hand across his jaw. For the first time she noticed that he was breathing harder than the short walk from the car should account for, and that his coat on the left side, just below the shoulder, was darker than the rain alone could explain. "You're bleeding," she said. "I know." "How bad?" "I've had worse." He glanced around the bakery again. "There are men outside who want to finish what they started tonight. I need 5 minutes while my people reposition. I'll be out of your life within the hour." The phrase hit her somewhere strange. Out of your life, as though he had ever been in it, as though he had ever chosen to stay long enough for leaving to be a real thing. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in 7 years, in the flat fluorescent light of her bakery kitchen, and felt the very precise, particular grief of someone who had mourned a person who was still alive. He looked older. Not old, but older in the way that men look when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time without showing it. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A small scar through his left eyebrow that she didn't recognize. He was still unmistakably the same man. That was the problem. 5 minutes, she said. She turned back to the counter and picked up the bench scraper because she needed something to do with her hands. She heard him move further into the room. She heard him pull out one of the stools at the prep table and sit down heavily, like a man whose body had been waiting for permission to admit how much it hurt. She did not look at him. "You look good," he said. "Don't do that." "I'm not doing anything. I'm just—" "Dante." She turned around. He was looking at her with that expression she had never fully been able to categorize even when she knew him. Something between a question and an apology, occupying the territory where those two things were almost the same. Don't. Just sit there. Don't talk to me like we're... Just sit. He sat. 3 minutes passed. She shaped dough. The rain was heavier now, drumming on the metal awning above the door, and the occasional sound of an engine from the street outside made her shoulders tighten each time. Then Owen appeared in the doorway from the back room. He had woken up again, or had never fully gone back to sleep. He was still in his socks and the gray shirt he'd worn to bed, and he had that specific 7-year-old look of someone who has sensed that the adult world has shifted in some way they can't yet name and have come to investigate. He looked at Dante. Dante looked at Owen. Maris watched it happen. She had imagined, in the dark part of her mind that she visited when she was very tired and her defenses were low, what it would be like if they were ever in the same room. She had imagined drama. She had imagined confrontation, revelation, the kind of moment that arrives with recognizable shape and sound. What she had not imagined was silence. What she had not imagined was the way Dante's face did something complicated and very quiet, the way something behind his eyes shifted from professional vigilance to something entirely else, something that looked very much like recognition. He was staring at Owen's eyes. Owen, unfazed in the way that 7-year-olds can sometimes be when they have grown up in a kitchen full of strangers, held out the half-eaten piece of brioche. "Do you want some?" Owen said. "Mom makes it. It's good." Dante did not answer immediately. His voice, when it came, was careful in a way that Maris had only heard from him once before. The night, years ago, when he'd told her something true about himself that he'd never told anyone. "What's your name?" he said. "Owen." Dante nodded slowly. His gaze dropped for just a moment to the small scar behind Owen's left ear. A birthmark Maris had always assumed was random, had never had cause to question. She watched the color leave Dante's face. She watched him put it together. "Maris," he said. Not the way he'd said it before. This was different. This was a man standing at the edge of something he hadn't seen coming, looking down at a 7-year drop. "He needs to go back to bed," she said. Her voice was very even. She was very proud of how even it was. "Mom," Owen said, "the man is bleeding." "I know, sweetheart. Back room, please." Owen considered this. He put the brioche down on the edge of the prep table in a gesture that managed to convey both obedience and protest, and retreated to the back room with the dragging dignity of a child who suspects he is missing something important. The moment he was gone, Maris turned. "Don't," she said. She said it before he could open his mouth. "Whatever you are about to say to me right now, don't. Your 5 minutes are almost up, and there are men outside, and you said you'd be gone. So, be gone." "He has the Vescry eyes," Dante said. "I don't know what that means." "Yes, you do." He stood, slowly, like it cost him something. "The scar behind his ear. My grandfather had it. My father had it. I have it." He reached up and turned his head slightly so she could see. Behind his left ear, the small pale seam of a birthmark she had noticed once, years ago, and filed away without understanding what it meant. "It's genetic. It only passes through the male line." "Maris." She said nothing. "How old is he?" She said nothing. "Maris, how old?" "7," she said. The word came out like a stone dropping. Dante Vescari, the man who ran the most feared criminal organization in the city, the man who had survived 3 assassination attempts and 2 federal investigations, and whatever had happened tonight that was still bleeding through his coat, sat back down on the stool and put his hands flat on the prep table and looked at them. He didn't say anything for a long time. Outside, the rain came down hard. Somewhere on the street, a car door opened and closed. One of his men, repositioning, like he'd said. A reminder that the world outside this bakery was still the world outside this bakery. That there were people out there who had tried to kill him tonight. That the 5 minutes had run out. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I was told you were dead." The words landed on Maris like a physical weight. She grabbed the edge of the counter. Not to steady herself, she was past needing steadying, to keep herself from crossing the room. "I was told," she said, "that you chose the organization, that you chose Raphael and the money and everything that came with it. I was told that you knew I was pregnant and you—" She stopped. Her voice was doing something she wouldn't let it do. I was told you made your choice. Dante raised his head. Something crossed his face that she had no word for. Raphael, he said. It wasn't a question. The way he said the name, quiet, precise, with the flatness of a man cataloging a confirmed fact, told her that he had already suspected, that some part of him had for years been building a case without enough evidence to close it. Now he had evidence. The front window of the bakery exploded inward, glass across the floor, across the prep table, and Maris was down behind the counter before she consciously decided to move. 7 years of hypervigilance paying off all at once. And Owen was in the back room. Owen was in the back room. She needed to get to Owen. She was already moving when she felt Dante's hand on her arm, not grabbing, not restraining, just present. He was crouched beside her, his coat finally open, and a weapon she didn't look at directly in his right hand. "Stay down," he said. "My men are outside. This ends in 30 seconds. My son is in the back room." "I know." He looked at her. "He won't be touched. I swear to you, not by anyone." It was, she thought, maybe the worst possible moment for her to believe him. But she did. She still did. That was the thing about Dante Viscari that she had never been able to logic her way out of. She believed him when he made a promise, even when she had every reason not to. Even after 7 years, even now, crouched on the flour-dusted floor of her bakery with glass everywhere and rain coming through the broken window, she believed him. He was already moving toward the door in a low crouch, and outside she could hear the controlled chaos of men who knew their jobs and were doing them, and she pressed her back against the cabinet below the counter and looked at the doorway to the back room and thought, "Hold on, Owen. Hold on, baby. We've got 30 more seconds." She'd been holding on for 7 years. She could manage 30 seconds. What she didn't know yet, what neither of them knew, crouched in the wreckage of her small, careful life, while the men outside fought over futures neither had chosen, was that the man who had sent those men was not out there in the dark. Raphael Orsini was 4 blocks away, sitting in a dry car with a phone in his hand, watching a different screen entirely. And on that screen was a file he'd been maintaining for 7 years. A file with Owen Quinn's school schedule, his medical records, his daily route. Raphael had known about Owen for a very long time. He had simply been waiting for the right moment to use him. The 30 seconds Dante had promised stretched into 4 minutes of controlled violence that Maris heard but did not see. She stayed behind the counter. Not because she was told to, she had stopped taking orders from men a long time ago, but because moving meant crossing the open space below the broken window, and she wasn't stupid. She kept her back against the cabinet and her eyes on the doorway to the back room and counted her own breaths, the way she had taught herself to do in the early months after she ran, when panic had been a thing she couldn't afford and had to learn to manage like a chronic condition. In, out. Owen is in the back room. The back room has no exterior windows. He is safe for right now, and right now is all that exists. The gunfire outside was short and precise, not the prolonged exchange of men who didn't know what they were doing, but the quick, targeted sounds of professionals finishing something. 2 shots. A pause. 1 more. Then voices, low and clipped, the kind of communication that didn't need full sentences because everyone involved already understood the grammar. Then silence. Then Dante came back through the door. He moved differently than he had before. Before he'd been containing something. The bleeding, the wet, the careful management of a man who had walked into a space that required him to be something other than what he was. Now he wasn't containing anything. He crossed the bakery in 4 strides and crouched in front of her, and his eyes when they found hers were completely different from the eyes she remembered. "We have to move," he said. "Now. Not in 10 minutes. Now." "Owen? I'll carry him if I have to." He was already standing, already reaching a hand down to her. "There is a second team. My men took out the first, but there is a second team, and they will be here in under 4 minutes. I need you moving." She took his hand. Not because the gesture meant anything, she told herself that very firmly in the half-second she spent telling herself things, but because he was right and 4 minutes was not enough time for sentiment. Owen was awake in this back room. He was sitting on the cot Maris kept back there for slow mornings when he needed to rest before school, and he had his knees pulled to his chest, and his gray eyes were enormous, but his chin was steady. He looked, in that moment, so much like his father that Maris had to look away. "We need to go," she told him. "Right now. You don't need shoes." "What's happening?" Owen said. "I'll explain later. You always say that. Owen. He came. That was the thing about Owen. He complained in the specific dry register of a child who had inherited his mother's composure and his father's stubbornness. But when something in her voice told him it was real, he came. He slid off the cot and took her hand and looked at Dante with a measuring attention that a 7-year-old should not have had, but did. Are you still bleeding? Owen asked him. A little, Dante said. My mom has bandages. She has a lot of them. I know she does. Come on. They went out the back through the narrow service corridor that ran behind the row of businesses on Callan Street, where one of Dante's vehicles was already idling. A man she didn't know held the rear door open. He didn't look at her directly. He looked at Owen, and she watched something cross his face, the same thing that had crossed Dante's face. And then he looked at Dante, and Dante gave a tiny shake of his head, and the man looked at nothing. Inside the vehicle, it was warm and smelled like leather, and something underneath that. Tension, she thought, or the specific cologne of men who had just done violent things and were pretending they hadn't. Owen climbed in beside her and immediately pressed against her side. She put her arm around him. Dante got in the front. The door hadn't fully closed before the car was moving. Where are we going? Maris said. Safe house, 40 minutes north. I have nowhere to leave Owen. He has school tomorrow. The look Dante gave her over his shoulder was not unkind. It was the look of a man trying to decide how much truth to give someone who had already absorbed a significant amount of truth in the last 20 minutes. He won't be going to school tomorrow, Dante said carefully. I'm sorry. For how long? I don't know yet. Maris looked out the window. The city moved past in the rain. Familiar streets, the corner where Owen bought chips on Fridays, the bus stop where she waited with him every morning. All of it sliding away like something she was already in the past of, though she was still looking at it. Who sent them? She said. Dante was quiet for a moment. His second in command, she gathered that's what the man in the driver's seat was, from the way Dante spoke to him in short, direct phrases without explaining himself, was navigating through the pre-dawn streets with practiced efficiency, and no one in the car said anything while Dante decided how to answer. I have a suspicion, he said finally. Raphael Orsini. The name landed like a thrown object. She watched the back of Dante's neck. What do you know about Raphael? He said. I know he was the one who came to me 7 years ago. I know he's the one who told me that you'd chosen, that you'd been offered a choice between the organization and me, and you'd taken about 30 seconds to make it. Her voice was steady. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head for years, not knowing she was rehearsing it, not knowing it would ever be necessary. He was very detailed about it. He told me what you said. He told me you said that I was a temporary arrangement and you had permanent interest to protect. Something happened in the front of the car. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. Dante did not turn around. He sat very still, and she had the sense of a man doing precise, controlled work inside his own head. The same work she recognized from years ago, when she had first understood what he did for a living and had spent a night watching him process something ugly and terrible and come out the other side of it without showing anyone what it had cost. He told me you were dead, Dante said. His voice was very quiet. That you'd been in a car 2 blocks from your apartment when it went up. He had photos. Of what? Of the car. Of the scene. A pause. Of enough. Owen, pressed against Maris's side, had gone very still in the way of children who are absorbing things they're not supposed to hear and will ask about in 3 days at the worst possible moment. Maris pressed her cheek briefly to the top of his head. He manufactured it, she said. Not a question. Yes. Why? This time the silence was longer. The car turned onto the highway ramp and the city fell away behind them and the rain on the windows got heavier, or maybe the speed just made it seem that way, the drops streaming sideways. That, Dante said, is what I need to find out. She didn't push it, not yet. She had been carrying 7 years of unanswered questions, and she could carry them a little longer. She was good at carrying things. Owen fell asleep against her shoulder somewhere around the 20-minute mark, with the absolute trust of a child who has decided that if his mother is calm, then the situation is manageable. And Maris sat with her arm around him and looked at the back of Dante Viscari's head, and thought about all the ways a life could hinge on a single conversation with a single man who had decided to lie. The safe house was a property she would not have identified as a safe house from the outside. It looked like a farmhouse, old stone, 2 stories, set back from the road behind a tree line that was thick enough to block sight lines from the highway. But the gravel driveway had sensors in it, and the windows she could see had the particular non-reflection of reinforced glass. And when they pulled up, 2 men stepped out of the tree line with the casual readiness of people who had been standing there for a while and were not at all surprised to see the car. She carried Owen inside. He didn't wake up. The interior was warmer than the outside suggested, clean, functional. A kitchen that had never been used for actual cooking, a sitting room with no personal objects in it, stairs leading up to bedrooms she hadn't seen yet. One of Dante's men showed her to a room on the 2nd floor with a bed large enough for both her and Owen, and a bathroom, and a lock on the inside of the door that she tested twice before she put Owen down. He didn't wake up when she laid him on the bed. He never did, in the deep part of a sleep. She pulled the blanket over him and stood looking at him for a moment. Just a moment. She couldn't afford more than that. And then she went back downstairs. Dante was in the kitchen with a woman Maris hadn't noticed in the car, who was working on the wound in his shoulder with the efficient detachment of a medical professional who had done this in worse conditions. The coat was off. The shirt was off. The wound was... She looked at it once and then looked away. Not from squeamishness, but because looking at Dante Viscari shirtless in a kitchen at 4 in the morning was a specific problem she didn't need added to her current inventory. "He's asleep," she said. "Good." Dante didn't look at her while the woman worked. He was looking at something on the table in front of him, a phone, a tablet, papers she couldn't read from across the room. "There's coffee." She poured herself a cup because her hands needed something to do, and because she genuinely needed the caffeine, and because accepting coffee from a man was not the same as accepting anything else from him. She leaned against the counter opposite and drank it and watched him. "You said you had a suspicion," she said. "Before in the car. You said suspicion like it wasn't the whole word." He was quiet while the woman tied off the last of whatever she'd done to the wound and gathered her materials and left the room without being told. Someone who knew when a conversation required privacy. Maris noted that. She noted a lot of things about the way Dante's operation functioned. It was something she'd noticed even years ago. The fluency of it, the way people around him moved as extensions of a single intelligence without needing constant direction. She had found it unsettling once. Now she found it frightening for a different reason. "I've been running my own investigation," Dante said. He picked up his shirt. A clean one, she realized. Someone had brought it and pulled it on, internally, for the past 3 years. Someone inside the organization has been redirecting funds. Small amounts at first. The kind of thing that gets attributed to accounting discrepancies and doesn't get looked at hard. But over 3 years it accumulates, and someone with enough access and enough patience could build... He stopped. Chose the next word carefully. Infrastructure. What kind of infrastructure? The kind you build when you're planning to take something over. The coffee was too hot, but she drank it anyway. "And you think that's Raphael?" "I know it's Raphael." He said it flatly, without the performance of certainty. Just the quiet, factual quality of a man closing a door that had been open for a long time. "I've known it for about 6 weeks. What I didn't know was why. Why now? Why this particular escalation? Why sending men to, He stopped again. This stop was different. He looked at the table. "I didn't know about Owen." She let that sit there between them. "And now that you do," she said. He looked up at her. "Now that I do, I understand why the timeline shifted, why Raphael moved up whatever he's been planning." He picked up the tablet and turned it to face her. On the screen was a surveillance image, grainy, taken from distance, but clear enough. A man in a dark jacket standing outside the school on Connell Street. Standing there for a long time, looking at the gate. The man was Raphael Orsini. The timestamp on the image was from 8 months ago. Maris set the coffee cup down very carefully because her hands had stopped being reliable. She looked at the image and she thought about Owen walking through that gate every morning, Owen with his lunchbox and his dragging backpack, Owen stopping sometimes to look at something on the ground, a rock, an interesting leaf, some piece of the world that caught his attention, and she thought about that man standing there watching him. 8 months, she said. At least. That's the earliest we've recovered. There may be earlier. You said we. Who else knows? Right now, 3 people. Myself, you, and Marco. He nodded toward the other room. She took that to mean the driver. I need to keep it that way until I understand the full scope of what Raphael's built inside the organization. You mean you don't know who else is working with him? No. She absorbed this. A man who ran a criminal empire and currently didn't know how much of it he actually controlled. So when you walked into my bakery tonight, I walked into your bakery, Dante said, because the car I was in was forced off a pre-planned route by men who knew that route. That route was given to a total of 4 people. One of them is dead. 2 of them I trust. The 4th, he shook his head. I was 3 blocks from your street when the vehicle took fire. I was on foot after that. And you came to my bakery. I didn't know it was your bakery. I didn't know you were alive. He held her gaze. I saw the light on. I saw a door that wasn't locked. I came in out of the rain. She thought about that. About the specific geometry of coincidence, or not coincidence. About the door she had forgotten to lock. About Owen being awake early. About the dream Owen had described. A man in a coat standing outside the window. Owen dreamed about you, she said, before you arrived. He woke up and told me. Dante was quiet for a moment. Kids pick up on things. I know, She picked the coffee back up. Needed something to hold. 7 years is a long time to construct a version of events. A version you believe in. And then someone walks through your unlocked door and the whole thing... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I know, he said. You don't. You had a life. You had the organization and the war and whatever else. You had things to do. I had one thing. Her voice was under control, but only barely. I had one thing and I did it every single day and it was enough. It was enough. And now, Maris, don't say my name like that. Like what? Like you're worried about me. You don't get to be worried about me. You just found out you have a son 20 minutes ago and you're allowed to be whatever you are about that. But worried about me is something you gave up a long time ago, even if it turns out you didn't choose to give it up. He didn't argue with that. She respected him for it. The old Dante, the young one, the one she'd fallen in love with before she understood the full weight of the world he inhabited, would have pushed back, would have tried to make the conversation something more comfortable. This Dante let it land. There's something else, he said. She waited. He turned the tablet back toward himself and pulled up a different screen. She couldn't see it from across the kitchen. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of a man who has been trying to figure out how to say something and has finally accepted that there is no good way. My father died 14 months ago, he said. She had not known that. She had cut off every possible connection to that world when she ran. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it, because whatever complicated thing Dante's father had been, he had loved his son. Before he died, he transferred a significant amount of the organization's assets, liquid assets, property titles, account information, into an encrypted format. He told me he'd done it. He told me the key would be safe. Dante paused. He didn't tell me where the key was. Why are you telling me this? Because we recovered Raphael's communications from the past 3 months. He set the tablet down. He's been looking for the key. He has people working on it. And in the past 6 weeks since... He stopped, pressed his mouth together. Since around the time that surveillance image was taken. Maris felt something cold move through her. You're not saying what you're saying. The lullaby, he said. She went very still. The one you sing to Owen. I know about it because my father wrote it originally. He wrote it for my mother when they were young, before she died. And I sang it to you once, in the middle of the night when you couldn't sleep. Do you remember? I remember. My father encoded the asset locations into the melody, into the specific interval structure of it. The intervals between the notes correspond to account numbers, coordinates, access codes. He thought it was the safest possible storage because it was something that would just live in a family, something no one would think to analyze. He looked at her directly. Raphael doesn't know this. He knows Owen is connected to the key. He's picked up on that somehow, a partial intercept, something, but he doesn't know the key is the melody itself. He thinks the boy has something on him, something physical. That's why he's been watching. He's been waiting to find out what Owen carries. Maris was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she usually wasn't. Aware of the distance between this kitchen and the room upstairs where her son was sleeping. Owen, who fell asleep every night listening to her hum that melody. Owen, who had learned to hum it himself without being taught, the way children absorb music they hear enough times. Owen, who had been carrying an encrypted fortune in his memory since before he could form complete sentences without either of them knowing. He doesn't know, she said. Owen doesn't know. I didn't know. I know you didn't. And Raphael, how close is he to figuring it out? Dante picked up his phone. He stared at it for a moment, and then he put it face down on the table and looked at her. That's what I've been trying to determine. What I know is that 6 weeks ago, something shifted. He stopped just watching and started, he glanced at the phone, started moving pieces. As if the word had cued something, the phone on the table buzzed. Dante picked it up, read whatever was on the screen. His face did the thing she remembered, went completely flat, all expression removed, the controlled blankness of someone absorbing something very bad before they decided what to do with it. What? She said. My head of security, Dante said. Lena Voss. She's been with me for 4 years. He set the phone down again. She was found an hour ago in the parking structure adjacent to my office building. Is she? Yes. Maris said nothing. She was the third person who knew my route tonight, Dante said. He said it with the exhausted precision of a man completing an equation he didn't want the answer to. She was the one I trusted most. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly. The walls of the safe house, which had felt reassuringly solid an hour ago, felt like a perimeter that someone else had already measured. He's cleaning up, Maris said. Yes. Which means he knows the attack tonight failed. Yes. Which means he knows you're still alive and you know enough to come after him. Yes. Dante stood. He moved to the window and looked out at the tree line, at the dark where his men were standing in the wet. Which means He corrected himself with the kind of deliberateness that told her the correction wasn't accidental. I have a very narrow window before he recalibrates and does whatever comes next. And whatever comes next will not be an attempt on me. He turned from the window. It'll be an attempt on Owen. The word attempt sat in the room like a knife laid on a table. Maris looked at the ceiling, at the floor above her head where her son was sleeping under a blanket in a room she'd locked from the inside. She thought about the surveillance image, the timestamp, 8 months ago. She thought about the man who had walked into her bakery all those years ago with his hands folded and his smile that didn't move his eyes, who had told her with great detail and very convincing regret that the man she loved had chosen to let her go. She thought about how she had believed him. She thought about how she had sat in her car afterward and cried so hard she couldn't breathe, and then she had driven to the clinic, and then she had spent the next 7 years building something that worked. She thought about all of that, and she looked at the ceiling and she made a decision. Tell me what you need from me, she said. Dante turned from the window. To find the key, she said. To find whatever Raphael is looking for. Tell me what you need. Maris, don't manage me. Don't give me the version where I stay in this room with the locked door and you go handle it. That ends with Owen growing up hearing a different version of how everything went wrong. She met his eyes. I know the melody. I know every variation of it. If the key is in the music, I'm the one who can read it. So tell me what you need. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she could see the specific calculus happening behind his eyes, the professional assessment of risk, the thing he was trained to do overriding the thing he would have preferred to feel. I need you to write it down, he said finally. Every note, the way my father played it, the exact intervals. I have a cryptographer who can work with it, but she needs the source material. He paused. And I need you to trust that the people in this house can keep Owen safe while you do it. I don't trust one in this house. I know. I don't trust you. I know that too. She thought about the man standing outside the school gate 8 months ago. She thought about the window of her bakery exploding inward. She thought about how long she had been running and how completely, in the space of one night, the act of running had become something that would get her son killed rather than something that would keep him safe. All right, she said. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, and he pushed a yellow legal pad and a pen across the table, and she picked up the pen and she began to write the melody that her son had been humming himself to sleep with every night of his 7-year life. The melody that was also, it turned out, the map to an empire. She got halfway down the first page when the safe house lost power. Every light in the building went out simultaneously. Outside, through the window, she heard the sound of one of the men in the tree line. A short sound, cut off. In the sudden dark, Dante's voice was very quiet and very close. "They found us," he said. And upstairs, Owen woke up screaming. Not the gradual, confused waking of a child pulled from a nightmare. A sharp, single cry that cut through the dark house and stopped just as fast, like something had startled him fully conscious all at once. Maris was already out of the chair. She didn't decide to move. Her body moved and her mind caught up somewhere on the stairs, her hand finding the railing in the pitch black, her feet taking the steps the way feet do when they've mapped a space and no longer need eyes. She hit the landing and turned and had her hand on the locked door before she registered that the lock was on the inside and she couldn't open it from here. "Owen." She kept her voice flat. Not calm, flat. Calm was a performance and Owen could always tell. Flat was just information. "Owen, it's me. I need you to unlock the door." A beat. 2. The house was very quiet in a way that wasn't quiet at all. It was the specific absence of the sounds that had been there before. The low-frequency hum of electronics, the small movements of men outside. All of it gone. The lock clicked. The door opened 3 inches, and Owen's face appeared in the gap, gray eyes enormous, fully awake in the way children get when adrenaline overrides everything else. "The lights went off," he said. "I know." She pushed the door open and got inside and closed it behind her. "Come here." He came. She pulled him against her side and stood with her back to the door and thought about the window in this room. One window, facing the rear of the property, the tree line Dante's men had been standing in. She moved them both away from it without turning it into something that would frighten him more than he already was. Dante appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later with a flashlight and a look on his face that she read in half a second, contained, functional, already working. Behind him she could see Marco, his phone to his ear, speaking in low, rapid sentences. "Generator is disabled," Dante said. "Not a power failure. Disabled. Deliberately." He looked at Owen. Something in his face shifted for just a moment, that private recalibration she'd been watching him do all night every time his eyes landed on the boy. Then it closed again. "We have maybe 4 minutes before they're on the perimeter." "How many?" Maris said. "Unknown. At least 6. He looked at her directly. "We go out the east side on foot. There's a vehicle 200 meters into the tree line. Secondary emergency protocol. Marco's people are already moving to intercept." "Owen can't run 200 meters in the dark in his socks." "I know." Dante looked at Owen. "Can you hold on to my back if I carry you?" Owen looked at him with the unsettling seriousness of a 7-year-old making a real assessment. "Are you still bleeding?" "A little less than before." "Okay," Owen said. "Yeah." They went down the stairs in the dark with Dante's flashlight cutting a low, narrow beam across the floor. Marco already at the east door, 2 other men she hadn't seen before positioned at angles she understood were tactical without being able to name why. The whole operation moved with the fluid, practiced compression of people who had rehearsed for exactly this kind of thing and were now simply doing it. Owen climbed onto Dante's back without drama, locked his arms around his neck. Dante adjusted once, making sure the grip on his wounded side didn't compromise his range of movement, and then he was moving and Maris was beside him and the east door opened and the night came in cold and wet and absolutely dark. The tree line was 40 meters from the house. It felt like 400. She ran without looking back, the wet ground under her feet, the cold air in her lungs, the sound of her own breath loud in her ears, and Owen's quiet, focused breathing above and behind her where he was holding on with everything he had, not making a sound, not asking anything, just trusting, just trusting. After one night, after a few hours with a man he'd never met before today. She didn't have time to think about what that meant. She filed it away in the place where she kept things she'd think about later, when later was a thing she had. They made the tree line. The vehicle was where Dante said it would be, dark, already running, Marco pulling ahead to reach it first. Maris got Owen off Dante's back and into the rear seat and climbed in after him and pulled the door, and the car was moving before it fully closed. In the darkness behind them, back at the house, she heard the sounds she'd been expecting, distant and muffled by the trees. She didn't look back. Owen sat pressed against her with his forehead against her arm. After a moment, he said very quietly, "Mom." "Yeah, I'm not going to school tomorrow, am I?" She almost laughed. The specific, wild absurdity of it. The precision of a 7-year-old locating the most concrete fact in the middle of a collapsing situation. "No, baby," she said. "Not tomorrow." He nodded slowly, processing this. Then, "Is that man going to come with us?" She looked at Dante in the front seat. He was on the phone, his voice low and clipped, already 3 steps ahead into whatever came next. She watched the back of his head and thought about the yellow legal pad back at the safe house. The melody half written, the map half drawn, abandoned on a kitchen table in a house that Raphael's men were walking through right now. She still had it in her memory. Every note, every interval. She had been singing it for 7 years. Raphael had been watching them for 8 months. He had killed Lena Voss. He had sent men twice in one night. He was not going to stop. And she understood, in the cold moving dark of that vehicle with her son pressed against her side, that the version of her life where she kept her head down and stayed careful and maintained the small, functional world she'd built, that version was already gone. It had been gone from the moment Dante walked through her unlocked door, and probably, if she was honest, it had never been as secure as she'd made herself believe. There was no careful left. There was only forward. "Yes," she told Owen. "He's coming with us." Owen considered this with the gravity it deserved. "Okay," he said. Then he closed his eyes and leaned into her, and within 2 minutes, he was asleep again. The deep, instant sleep of a child who has decided the adults have the situation sufficiently in hand, and Maris sat in the dark with her arms around him and her jaw set, and every note of that melody running through her head like a current. She was finally, after 7 years, ready to use. The second safe house was a converted warehouse on the edge of an industrial district that smelled like rust and old motor oil and the specific cold of buildings that don't get heated because no one is supposed to be in them. Dante's people had it set up within the hour. Cots, a portable generator running on minimum power, a folding table that became the operation's nerve center the moment Marco spread 3 laptops across it and started pulling feeds. Maris put Owen on a cot in the far corner with a thermal blanket and a jacket she found on a hook by the door, and he went back to sleep without complaint because Owen had inherited her capacity for adaptation, and she had never been more grateful for anything in her life. She stood at the table and looked at what Marco was pulling up and tried to understand the shape of what they were dealing with. "The first safe house was compromised within 90 minutes of our arrival," Marco said. He had the flat informational delivery of someone who had trained themselves out of emotional response to bad news. Which means the location was already known, not tracked, known in advance. "Which means someone told them where we were going," Maris said. "Yes." "Before we got there?" "Yes." She looked at Dante. He was standing with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, and the look of a man adding numbers in his head that keep coming out wrong. "Who knew the secondary location?" she said. 4 people, Dante said. "Myself, Marco, Lena." He stopped. Lena was dead. He recalibrated without showing it. "And my communications director, a man named P.O. Carver. He's been with the organization for 11 years. Longer than Raphael's been moving money," Marco said, not looking up from the screen. The implication sat on the table between them like something no one wanted to pick up. "Find him," Dante said. "Working on it." Maris pulled out the chair in front of the center laptop and sat down. She picked up a pen from the table, someone's pen, left there, ordinary blue ink, and she pulled a blank piece of paper toward her and she started writing the melody from the beginning. She didn't ask permission. She didn't announce what she was doing. She just did it, because the melody was the only concrete thing she had to contribute, and she was not going to sit in a corner and wait for men to decide what happened to her son. The notes came easily, 7 years of the same song every night. The intervals were as familiar to her as her own breathing, the slight irregularity in the third measure that she'd always thought was just a quirk of the version she'd learned, the unexpected step in the 6th measure that resolved in a way that felt almost mathematical when she thought about it now. When she'd first heard it, she'd thought it was just an old song, something handed down, something without a source. She wrote it all out, every note, every interval, the precise sequence of the full melody and the 2 variations she'd developed over years of singing it when Owen was sick or scared or just needed the particular comfort of something that didn't change. When she was finished, she looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up and held it out to Dante. He took it. He looked at it. He carried it to Marco without a word, and Marco took it and photographed it and sent it somewhere Maris didn't ask about. "How long?" she said. "The cryptographer is already running the interval analysis," Marco said. She had the preliminary framework built from the partial version we had. This, he glanced at the paper. This fills in everything she was missing. Couple of hours, maybe less. 2 hours. Maris looked at Owen asleep in the corner and thought about what 2 hours meant and what it didn't mean, and decided to use the time the only way she knew how, which was to understand the problem better than the people causing it. "Tell me about Raphael," she said. "Not what he's done, who he is, where he came from." Dante pulled out the chair across from her and sat down and looked at his hands for a moment, the way he did when he was deciding how far back to start. "He came to my father 22 years ago," he said. "Nobody. No family connections, no reputation, nothing. But he had a specific skill, yet he could read people. Not in the intuitive way, not instinct. He could genuinely analyze a person's motivations and predict their behavior with a kind of accuracy that was, my father called it a gift. He said Raphael could look at a man for 5 minutes and tell you his price." Dante paused. What my father didn't fully understand was that Raphael was applying that skill to him the whole time, reading him, learning him, figuring out what he valued most and what he feared most. "And what did your father value most?" Maris said. "Me," Dante said without self-consciousness. Just a fact. "And the bloodline. The continuation of the family name in the organization. He was old-fashioned about it. He believed the organization had to pass through blood or it would fracture. So Raphael understood that the way to take the organization was to remove the bloodline. Remove or corrupt? Yes." He looked at her. "What he tried to do to us, separating us, making each of us believe the other was dead or had chosen to leave, that wasn't about destroying the family. That was about controlling what the family became. He wanted me intact. He wanted me running the organization, grieving, isolated, dependent on his counsel. He wanted to be the man behind the man." He stopped. Something shifted in his expression. What he didn't account for was Owen. "He didn't know I was pregnant." "No. When he found out, and I don't know exactly when he found out, but when he did, everything changed. Because Owen wasn't just an heir. Owen was a variable he hadn't introduced and couldn't fully control." Marco looked up from his screen. "I've got Pio Carver." Both of them turned. "He's at the Mercer Grand. Checked in 3 hours ago under a different name." Marco turned one of the laptops to face them. On the screen was a hotel registration, a room number, a floor plan pulled from somewhere Maris didn't want to think about. "He's not alone. There's a second person in the room registered as his wife. Hotel records show no wife in 11 years of business travel." "It's a handler," Dante said. "That's my read." Dante stood. He had the quality in that moment of a man who has been managing something with great patience and has finally reached the end of his capacity for patience. "I need to speak to Pio." "Dante." Marco's voice had a warning in it. Not a challenge, just a calibration. "If he's already been moved to a handler, Raphael knows we're looking. Going to that hotel, I know the risk. If it's a trap, I know." He looked at Maris. Something in the look asked something he didn't put into words. "Go," she said. "I'll be here. Owen will be here. Go find out what Pio knows, and come back with something we can use." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded and picked up his coat and left with 2 of his men, and the warehouse door closed behind them, and Maris was alone with Marco and the hum of the laptops and the sound of Owen breathing steadily in the corner. She sat with that for a while. Then she got up and poured water from a bottle on the table into a cup and drank it and looked at the laptops and said, "Show me the surveillance file, the one on Owen, all of it." Marco looked at her. "I'm his mother," she said. "Show me." He showed her. It was worse than she'd expected, and she had expected something bad. The file went back not 8 months, but closer to 2 years. The earlier entries were infrequent, observational, the log check-ins of someone maintaining awareness of a subject without yet having a reason to escalate. Owen at the park. Owen at a pediatric appointment. Owen in the yard behind the bakery on the 2 afternoons a week, when Maris let him play back there while she cleaned up. The entries became more frequent 14 months ago, around the time Dante's father died. The implications of that timing hit her in stages. First, the obvious one. Raphael had known about Owen before Dante's father died, and the father's death had changed the calculation. Then the second one, slower and colder. Dante's father had transferred the assets into the encrypted melody 14 months ago, which meant the father had known something was coming. He had been afraid. He had taken the most important thing he had and hidden it in the most unlikely place he could think of. A lullaby, an old song, something that lived in the mouths of family members and couldn't be taken or burned or seized. Had he known about Owen? She sat with that question, and it sat back at her and didn't give her anything useful, so she kept moving through the file. The last entry was time-stamped for observation log. It was a communication, intercepted, she assumed by whatever means Marco's systems used, between two people whose names were redacted on one side. The other side was identified only by a code she didn't recognize. But the content was clear enough. The subject is not carrying the key externally. Recommend revised approach. The key may be behavioral or memorial rather than physical. Recommend acquisition of subject for direct assessment. Acquisition of subject. Owen. They meant Owen. 4 days ago, they had decided to stop watching and start taking. Maris set the laptop down very carefully. She breathed through the thing in her chest. The thing that was not panic, that was something colder and more useful than panic. And she looked at her son asleep in the corner, and she made herself think clearly. They had been 4 days behind this. They were still 4 days behind. The attack on the bakery, the compromised safe house, all of it. Raphael had already been in motion before any of this started. They were reacting. They were always reacting. And every time they moved, something they thought was secure turned out not to be. The warehouse. This warehouse. She looked around it with new eyes, the rust and the cold and the industrial dark. 4 people knew the first safe house location, and it had been compromised. How many people knew this location? Marco, she said. How many people know we're here? He looked up. Something in her tone made him stop what he was doing. Dante, myself, and the 2 men who came with us from the house. And the 2 men outside. 6 people. Yes. The first location was compromised by one of 4 people who knew it. Yes. He was following her now. She could see it. So we have a 1 in 4 contamination rate, roughly speaking, among Dante's inner circle. That's one way to frame it. Apply it to 6 people, she said. Marco was quiet for a moment. He looked at the door that led to the outside where 2 of his men were standing in the dark. He looked at his phone. He looked at Maris. We should move Owen, he said. Yes, she said. Now, before Dante gets back. Marco was already on his feet, already reaching for his jacket, when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something in his face changed in a way that was very small and very significant. He answered it. She watched him listen. She watched his expression do the thing that expressions do when the news is bad enough that the body forgets to manage them. A small collapse, quickly recovered, but there if you knew how to look. He hung up. He stood for a moment with his back to her. Marco, she said. He turned around. That was Dante. What happened? P.O. Carver was dead when they arrived. He'd been dead for at least 2 hours. The handler was gone. He paused. They found something in the room, a laptop with a single open file. What file? Our location, Marco said. This location, with a timestamp from 40 minutes ago. He looked at the door. Someone in this building sent it. The 2 of them looked at each other across the folding table, and Maris registered everything at once. The laptop Marco had just been working on, the 2 men outside, the 6 people who knew where they were, and the 40-minute window that had already started closing. She was across the room and picking Owen up before Marco finished his next sentence. Owen woke without crying this time. He was getting faster at that, at understanding that waking up quickly was something the situation required. He wrapped his arms around her neck and she carried him to the center of the room because center was away from the doors and windows and she needed walls on as many sides as possible. You need to get out, she said, right now. The car's outside, the men are outside. One of the men outside sent our location to Raphael 40 minutes ago. She looked at Marco steadily. So we are not going out those doors. Marco pulled out his phone, then stopped. If one of the men outside had a way to monitor their communications. You're right, he said. He looked around the warehouse. There's a loading bay on the north wall. It's been welded shut, but the weld is old. Can we break it? With enough force, yes. Then get something with enough force, Maris said, and do it quietly. Marco moved. She stood in the center of the room with Owen on her hip and watched the doors and tried to calculate. 40 minutes ago, someone sent this location. How long had they had it before they sent it? How long did it take Raphael to move people? They had found the first safe house within 90 minutes of arrival. This location might be faster. This location had been given to Raphael with enough lead time that his people could already be... The north wall made a sound, not the sound of Marco at the loading bay. A different sound, from outside. The particular sound of something being placed against metal very carefully by someone who was trying not to make a sound and didn't quite succeed. Owen heard it too. His arms tightened around her neck. She turned to find Marco already at the loading bay with a length of iron pipe, and she crossed to him in 10 steps and said in his ear, so quietly it was barely breath. They're already here. North side. He looked at the wall. That's the only way out, he said. I know. If they're on the other side of that door, I know. She shifted Owen on her hip and looked at the iron pipe in Marco's hand and thought about the mercenaries Raphael had sent to her bakery, the professionals who had taken out Lena Voss, the team that had cleared the first safe house in under 4 minutes. She thought about the life she had built to be safe, the careful math of early mornings and low rent and never putting down roots that could be pulled. She thought about all of it, and she let it go. Give me the pipe, she said. Marco looked at her. Owen, she said. Can you stand for me for 2 minutes? Just stand right here and don't move. Owen looked at her face. He read whatever was in it. She didn't know what was in it, but he read it. And he slid down from her hip and stood. Okay, he said. She took the pipe from Marco's hand. The loading bay door was a double panel welded shut with 3 seam welds, old and oxidized. She looked at it for 3 seconds. The weakest point would be the center seam, the oldest weld, the one that had been under the most thermal stress over years of temperature change. She planted her feet. She swung. The impact rang through her arms and shoulders, and the weld cracked but didn't give. She swung again. Again. The third strike opened a gap at the bottom of the center seam, cold air bleeding through, and Marco's hands were there beside hers now, both of them pulling at the panel, the metal shrieking against itself. The door gave. Cold night air and darkness, and the smell of frost on concrete. The loading dock beyond was empty. A wide, flat apron of cracked asphalt, a chain-link fence 40 meters out. Beyond it, the industrial corridor running east. Empty. For now. Marco went first, weapon up, scanning, clear. He turned and she pushed Owen through the gap and followed him out, and they ran. Across the dock, across the apron, the chain-link fence rattling under Marco's hands as he found the cut section she hadn't known was there, but apparently he had. Behind them, inside the warehouse, she heard the north door come open. They were through the fence, into the corridor, running east because east was the direction Marco was moving and she had no better information. Owen's hand in hers, his feet on the cold ground in his socks, not complaining, not asking, just running. Dante's car found them 6 blocks east with the headlights off, moving slowly, and the door opened before it fully stopped. She got Owen in. Got herself in. Marco. Door. Moving. Dante looked at her across the back seat, at Owen, at the iron pipe she was still holding without having realized it, at her face, which she could feel had done something she wasn't controlling. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at all of it, and he absorbed it the way he absorbed things. Then he said, "It was Carver's second, a man named Solis. He's been in place for 7 months." "We know," Marco said from the front. "We have a location problem. We can't use any property in the network." "I know." "Dante," Marco said, "if Solis was in place for 7 months, then everything Solis knew is compromised," Dante said. "Yes, I know." He looked out the window. The city moved past. 7 months of operational information. Maris was looking at Dante's face when it happened. When he put together the same calculation she was working through. 7 months, everything Solis knew, the scope of what a man in Marco's second's position would have access to over 7 months. "The DNA test," she said. The car went very quiet. You ran a DNA test, she said, to confirm Owen. When did you run it? Dante's jaw was tight. 5 days ago. Through what channel? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. 5 days ago. Solis had been in place for 7 months. A DNA test run through internal channels would have gone through Solis. Raphael had known about the test. Raphael had known the results before Dante did. Raphael had known with certainty that Owen was Dante's son. With certainty, with documentation, with the kind of evidence that would make a man like Raphael recalibrate everything 5 days ago. The attacks on the bakery, the safe house, all of it. It hadn't been reactive. Raphael hadn't scrambled when Dante happened to walk into her bakery that morning. He had been ready. He had been waiting. The assassination attempt, the route compromise, all of it had been the opening move in a sequence Raphael had already designed. Dante had walked into that bakery because his route was forced. His route was forced because Raphael had arranged it. Raphael had known Maris was on Callan Street, had known Dante would end up there, had known what Dante would find. He set this in motion, Maris said. Her voice was very controlled. He didn't react to tonight. He engineered tonight. He wanted you to find us. Dante said nothing. He wanted you to find Owen and understand what Owen is, and he wanted you to do exactly what you did. Consolidate, run, pull us close, because that makes us easier to locate in one place. She looked at him. He was never trying to take Owen from me separately. He was trying to collect all 3 of us together. The silence in the car had a specific texture, the texture of people who have just understood the full dimensions of something that has been around them for longer than they knew. Owen was asleep again. Against her side, one hand curled around the edge of her sleeve, breathing slowly, trusting completely. Dante looked at his son's sleeping face. Then he looked at Maris, and she saw in his face the exact thing she recognized because she had felt it herself. In the early months after she ran, when she first understood the full scope of what had been done to them. The particular expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered so comprehensively for so long that anger hasn't caught up to it yet. What was ahead of the anger, what filled the space where anger hadn't arrived, was something colder and more precise. He wants all 3 of us, Dante said quietly. Then that's what he'll get. Maris looked at him. But on our terms, Dante said, not his. He looked at Marco. Get me Dr. Reyes. Tell her I need the full interval analysis within the hour. And get me everything we have on the abandoned St. Carmine property on the east side. That's Raphael's. I know what it is, Dante said. Get me the floor plans. Maris looked at Dante and understood that they had arrived at the place the night had been building toward all along. Not a place of safety, not a resolution, but the specific point where a person stops trying to outrun something and turns around to face it instead. She thought about her bakery, the broken window, the flowers still on the counter from the dough she'd been working when the world changed. She thought about the careful life she'd built and how completely it was gone now, and she did not grieve it. She had no room for grief right now. But she noted its absence the way you note the absence of something that was load-bearing. She would have to be the load-bearing thing now. She had been before. She could be again. Owen's hand tightened slightly on her sleeve, even in sleep, and she put her hand over his and held on, and the car moved through the dark city toward whatever Raphael Orsini had built inside the bones of the old St. Carmine property, and whatever he was waiting for them to do next. Marco pulled up the floor plans on his laptop and turned the screen so Dante could see it from the back seat. Maris looked at it too. The building was large, 4 stories, a basement level, the kind of structure that had once been something civic and functional and had been allowed to go dark and quiet over the years until a man who needed space for dark and quiet things had found a use for it. 3 entry points on the ground level, Marco said. 2 are visible from the street. The 3rd is the loading access on the south side, same configuration as the warehouse we just left. He'll expect us to use the south, Dante said. Yes. So we don't. Dante traced a finger across the screen. The basement has a utility access that connects to the storm drainage corridor running under the east block. It's not on the current building permits. I know it exists because my father used this property 20 years ago, and the access predates Raphael's ownership. He may know about it, Maris said. He may. Dante looked at her. But if he engineered tonight to pull us toward him, he'll be managing a specific expectation of how we arrive. The drainage access disrupts the sequence he's prepared for. It gives us 30 seconds he hasn't planned. 30 seconds. The same window he'd promised her in the bakery, crouched behind her counter with glass on the floor. She thought about how that 30 seconds had felt, like a thing you held in both hands very carefully. And she thought about what she'd done with it and what she was willing to do with another one. The melody analysis, she said. When Reyes finishes, what do we do with it? The asset locations become leverage, Dante said. Raphael wants the key because without it, the fortune is inaccessible to him, even if he takes control of the organization. If we decode it first and move the assets before he reaches them, he has nothing. The organization becomes an empty structure. Everything he's built toward for nearly a decade collapses. And Owen, she said, once the key is decoded and the assets are moved, Owen is no longer useful to him. Yes. She held Dante's gaze and understood what he was not saying alongside what he was. That right now, until that decoding was complete, Owen was the most valuable and therefore the most endangered person in the car. That the next few hours were the hours that mattered. That 30 seconds, properly used, could be enough. Her jaw set. Her hands steadied. Then let's not waste time, she said. Dr. Reyes called at 12 minutes past 3 in the morning. Marco had the phone on speaker before the second ring finished, and the voice that came through was the voice of a woman who had not slept and was not bothered by that. Precise, clipped, with the particular energy of someone who has just solved something that has been resisting them. The interval structure is a base 12 encoding system, she said. Your father was a careful man. The melody reads as music to anyone who doesn't know to look at the mathematical relationships between intervals rather than the notes themselves. But when you map the interval distances against a positional cipher, 12 positions, cycling, you get coordinate sets, account strings, access sequences. A pause. I have 47 discrete data points. I need 20 more minutes to verify the final sequence, but the bulk of it is clean. 20 minutes, Dante said. 18 if you stop talking to me. Marco ended the call. In the back seat, Owen was still asleep, his head now against Dante's arm rather than Maris's. A migration that had happened somewhere in the last hour without anyone directing it. Dante had gone very still when he noticed it, had not moved since, had sat with his arm at a careful angle so the weight of the boy's head was supported without waking him. Maris had watched this happen and had not said anything about it because there was nothing to say. The moment Reyes sends the verified sequences, Dante said, his voice low, Marco initiates the transfer protocols. Every asset moves simultaneously. Accounts, property titles, the offshore structures, all of it relocated to instruments Raphael has no access to and no knowledge of. He looked at Marco. How long does the transfer take once we initiate? 11 minutes for the full sequence. Some of the property instruments are slower, so those will take until morning. But the liquid assets, the accounts, 11 minutes. And once they move, Raphael has nothing. He has the organization's operational structure, the people, the infrastructure. People follow money, Dante said. He knows that. The moment word gets out that the assets have moved beyond his reach, his internal support collapses. He's been building this for a decade, and it runs on the promise of what he'll deliver when he's in control. Take away the delivery, and it's just a man with enemies. Maris had been listening to this and running her own calculation alongside it. He'll know, she said. The moment the transfers initiate, he'll know. He has enough contacts in the financial infrastructure. He'll get an alert or someone will tell him, and he'll... Yes, Dante said. So the 11 minutes between initiation and completion is the most dangerous 11 minutes of the night. He looked at her. Which is why we don't initiate from here. We initiate from inside. She understood him. You want to be in the building when it starts. I want Raphael to be managing two things at once, us and his building and his empire dissolving. A man cannot give full attention to two existential problems simultaneously. One of them suffers. He paused. I intend to be the one making both problems worse at the same time. Maris looked out the window at the dark street. The St. Carmine building was 4 blocks east. She could see the upper floors from here, dark against the darker sky, the kind of building that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. She thought about Owen. She thought about what she was about to agree to. Owen stays in the car, she said, with Reyes when she arrives. Not Marco. Marco comes in with us. Reyes is a civilian and Rafael has no reason to target her specifically. The car stays moving, circling, never stationary. If we're not out in 30 minutes, Reyes drives until morning and calls the number Marco gives her. Dante looked at her for a long moment. You're coming in. Yes. Maris, I know the melody. If Reyes hits a problem with the final sequences in the next 18 minutes, I'm the source material. And if Rafael has something prepared inside that building that your floor plans don't account for, you need someone who isn't in his database. She held his gaze. 7 years of being invisible. That's what I am to Rafael, a woman who ran. He doesn't know what I can do. That's an advantage. Use it. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. 4. Then, you stay close to me. You don't engage unless there's no alternative. Agreed. If I tell you to move, you move. No discussion. Agreed. He nodded once. It was not a comfortable nod. It was the nod of a man who has assessed a situation and arrived at an answer he doesn't like and is professional enough to act on it anyway. Owen woke up 12 minutes later when the car stopped and Reyes got in. A small, compact woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a laptop bag over one shoulder, who looked at Owen with the matter-of-fact kindness of someone who had children of her own and didn't make a production of it. Hi, Owen said. Hi yourself. She settled into the seat he vacated and opened her laptop without ceremony. Owen looked at Maris. I was fully awake now, the fast, complete wakefulness that had been developing in him all night, and his gray eyes were doing the reading thing, scanning her face, taking inventory. You're going somewhere, he said, for a little while. With him. He looked at Dante, who was standing outside the car door, not listening or pretending not to. Yes. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then, are you going to be okay? The question in his voice, in that flat, careful tone he'd developed that was so much older than 7 years had any right to produce, landed on her sternum like something physical. She put her hands on his face. She looked at him directly. Yes, she said. I'm going to be okay. You are going to stay in this car with Dr. Reyes, and the car is going to keep moving, and you are going to be okay. Both of us. How do you know? She thought about lying. She thought about the comfortable version. Of course, sweetheart, I promise. Everything will be fine. She had never lied to Owen about the things that mattered, and she was not going to start now. I don't know for certain, she said, but I know that I have gotten you through every hard thing so far, and I intend to keep that record. Owen looked at her. Something in him settled. Not relaxed, not relieved, but settled, like a structure that has found its load-bearing point. He nodded. She kissed his forehead and got out of the car. The drainage access was exactly where Dante said it would be. A utility grate set into the east face of the block, padlocked with a lock that Marco removed in under 10 seconds with a tool she didn't look at. The corridor beyond was low and wet and smelled like decades of rainwater and concrete, and they moved through it in single file with Marco in front and Dante behind her and 2 additional men whose names she hadn't learned bringing up the rear. Nobody spoke. The corridor was not wide enough for conversation, and the acoustics would carry sound upward through the drainage connections in ways none of them wanted. They moved with flashlights held low, beams angled at the ground, and Maris counted her own steps because counting was something to do with the part of her brain that wanted to run through worst-case scenarios. 83 steps to the basement access point. The door at the end of the corridor was steel, newer than the corridor itself, which told her Rafael had known about the access and had secured it rather than sealing it, which meant he used it, which meant there was a possibility of an active patrol on the other side. Marco held up a fist. Everyone stopped. He pressed his ear briefly to the door, then held up 2 fingers. 2 people. He looked at Dante. Dante looked at the door. He held up 3 fingers and counted down silently, and on 0. Marco opened the door, and the next 8 seconds were sounds Maris categorized and filed away without looking directly at them, and then they were through. The basement was a large open space that had been converted into something between an operations center and a storage facility. Banks of servers along the east wall, filing cabinets, a long table with monitors. The 2 men who had been here were no longer a concern. She looked at the servers. Is this where he's been running the financial infrastructure? Some of it, Dante said. He was already moving toward the stairs. Marco, pull what you can from those systems. Copy everything. 3 minutes. Marco was already at the nearest terminal. Dante looked at Maris. The main floor is above us. Raphael will be on the 3rd level. He always takes the high ground. It's a habit my father noted 20 years ago, and it never changed. He checked his weapon with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom the action had no emotional content. The 2 men I brought, they secure the stairwells. You and I go up. Just us. Just us. More people means more noise. He'll have a perimeter on the upper floors. I'd rather be small and quiet than well-armed and announced. He looked at her. Ready? She thought about the iron pipe she'd swung in the warehouse. She thought about the 7 years of very specific skills she had quietly accumulated while running a bakery and raising a child alone in a city that asked no questions. The self-defense classes she'd taken obsessively in the first 2 years. The lockpicking she'd learned from a retired locksmith who came in every morning for coffee and had taught her because she'd asked, and he was bored. The countless hours she'd spent learning how to be dangerous in ways that didn't announce themselves. She had never told anyone about any of it. There had been no one to tell. Ready, she said. The stairwell was dark, and Dante moved up it like a man who had done this kind of thing enough times that the fear had been metabolized into focus. Present but functional, fueling rather than impeding. She moved behind him and matched his pace and his silence, and did not let herself think about Owen in the moving car 4 blocks away, did not let herself think about anything except the next step and the step after it. 2nd floor. A corridor. 3 doors, all closed, light under the middle one, thin and yellow. Dante paused at it, listened, moved on. She followed. 3rd floor. The stairwell door at the 3rd floor had a light on the other side that bled through the gap at the bottom. Stronger than the floor below, more comprehensive. The sound that accompanied it was low and multiple, voices, not shouting, the controlled working murmur of people managing something active. Dante pressed his back to the wall beside the door. He looked at her. He held up 4 fingers. 4 people on the other side. She nodded. He opened the door. The room beyond was large, the full width of the building's 3rd floor, the windows on the north face boarded over. The south face covered with heavy curtains that blocked the street. The space had been organized into something that looked disturbingly like a legitimate command center. Monitors, communications equipment, 3 men at workstations, and a 4th standing at a central table with his back to the door, looking at a display she couldn't fully see from the entrance. The 4th man was Raphael Orsini. He turned before Dante reached the center of the room, which told her his perimeter was better than it looked. Some sensor, some mirror, some redundancy she hadn't spotted. He turned and he looked at Dante, and his face did something she had not expected. It did not show fear. It did not show surprise. It showed the expression of a man who has been waiting for something and has just watched it arrive on schedule. You used the drainage access, Raphael said. I wondered if you'd remember it. You left it unlocked, Dante said. I left it secured. Your man opened it in under 10 seconds. Raphael's gaze moved to Maris. It moved over her with the particular assessment she remembered from the morning he had walked into her bakery 7 years ago, cataloging, pricing, deciding. Maris, you look well. Parenthood apparently agrees with you. She said nothing. She had decided before entering the building that she would give Raphael nothing. No reaction, no engagement, nothing he could use to calibrate his approach. She was a wall. She had practiced being a wall. Where's the boy? Raphael said. Somewhere you can't reach, Dante said. That's a temporary condition. Raphael moved away from the central table, unhurried, in the direction of the east wall. He moved with his hands visible and his posture relaxed, which was more frightening than aggression would have been, because it meant he still felt he had control of the room. I want you to understand something, Dante. This isn't what you think it is. You murdered my father. The words fell into the room like dropped metal. Raphael stopped moving. Something crossed his face. Not guilt, not quite. Something more complicated. Your father, Raphael said carefully, was going to burn the organization to the ground, not metaphorically. He had made contact with federal authorities 8 months before he died. He was building a case. Everything you've spent your life inheriting, every asset, every relationship, every piece of infrastructure, he was going to hand to prosecutors in exchange for his own immunity. He paused. I preserved it, all of it, for you. Dante said nothing. His face was completely flat. The transfer he made before he died, Raphael continued. He wasn't hiding the assets to protect them. He was preparing to surrender them. I found out. I moved to stop it. The encoding, the melody, that was his failsafe, his proof of cooperation for the federal contact. A demonstration that he could deliver actionable intelligence on the organization's financial structure. Raphael's eyes moved between Dante and Maris. I've spent the past 14 months trying to decode it before the federal case could be reconstructed. Not to steal from you, to protect you. The silence in the room had a texture now. Maris felt it against her skin. She watched Dante. Watched him process it. Watched the specific work of a man trying to determine if what he's hearing is true or is the most sophisticated lie he's ever been told, and not being able to immediately tell the difference. Lena Voss, Dante said. You had her killed. Lena was the federal contact, Raphael said. She had been for 2 years. I can show you the communications. Another drop of metal into the room. Dante's jaw worked. Just once. She could see the structure of everything he thought he knew shifting under the pressure of this new information. Could see him trying to find the flaw in it, the place where it broke, the seam she could see him searching for. She found it first. The surveillance on Owen, she said. Both men looked at her. She had been the wall. Now she was not. If you were trying to protect the organization, she said to Raphael, and the melody was the threat, why surveil a 7-year-old child? Why not come to Dante directly when you decoded enough to understand what the melody was? Why not say, your father was building a case. Here's the evidence. Here's the melody. Here's what we need to do. She held his gaze. You didn't come to Dante. You watched Owen for 2 years, quietly, without telling anyone. She took one step forward. Because you didn't want Dante to know the key existed. You wanted to find it yourself, use it yourself, not to protect the organization, to own it. The federal case was real. Your father was real. And you used all of it as cover for the thing you actually wanted. The room was absolutely still. Raphael looked at her. The cataloging expression was gone. What replaced it was something stripped of performance, the actual face of the man underneath the careful management. It was not a face she wanted to look at for long. Smart, he said softly. He told me you were smart. He said that was the problem with you. Then he moved his right hand and the monitor on the central table changed, and what appeared on it made Dante's breath catch audibly beside her. A live feed. A car interior. The back seat. Owen, asleep. Dr. Reyes beside him, laptop open. And outside the car windows, visible in the frame, 2 vehicles she didn't recognize that had not been there 20 minutes ago, moving in parallel with Reyes's car, close enough that she could see the driver's face in the nearest one. Raphael's man. The boy, Raphael said, is currently exactly where I need him to be. The car your people are driving is on a route that ends in 4 minutes at a location where I have 12 men waiting. He straightened. So here's what happens next. You give me the completed interval analysis from Dr. Reyes. You authorize the asset transfer to accounts I specify, and I let the car pass. He looked at Dante with the expression of a man who has been patient for a very long time and has finally finished being patient. Or the car doesn't pass. And you spend the rest of your life knowing that the last thing your son saw was the inside of a vehicle that stopped. Dante's hand moved toward his weapon. If you shoot me, Raphael said, the order executes automatically. I'm the only one who can cancel it. He smiled for the first time since they'd entered the room. It was the smile she remembered from 7 years ago, the one that didn't move his eyes. So, shall we talk about the transfer? Maris's hand was in her jacket pocket. Had been since she walked through the door. Her fingers were around the thing she'd taken from the warehouse table when no one was watching. The small folded tool she'd palmed without announcement. The one she'd been carrying since before they entered the drainage corridor. The one she had not told Dante about because she had learned a long time ago that the most useful things you carry are the things no one knows you have. She looked at the monitor, at Owen's face, at the 2 vehicles outside the car's windows. 4 minutes, Raphael had said. She looked at Dante. He was looking at Raphael. His jaw was tight and his eyes were doing the calculation she had watched him do all night, running the options, finding the exits, trying to engineer 30 seconds out of a room that didn't have any. She caught his eye for just a moment, just a fraction of a second. She looked at him, and then she looked at the communications panel on the east wall, the one she had identified when they walked in as the relay point for Raphael's external coordination, the hub through which the order to the men outside Reyes's car would travel. And then she looked back at Dante. He held her gaze for half a second. He understood. "All right," Dante said to Raphael. He took one step forward, drawing Raphael's attention fully onto himself. "Let's talk about the transfer. Walk me through what you want." Raphael began to speak, and Maris began to move. Not fast. Fast was wrong. Fast was visible. Fast was the thing Raphael's peripheral attention would catch, even while he was focused on Dante. She moved the way she had learned to move in the years of being careful, which was with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who belonged exactly where they were going. 3 steps to the right, 2 steps toward the east wall. Her hand still in her pocket, fingers still around the tool. One of the 3 men at the workstations glanced at her. She did not look back at him. She kept her eyes on the communications panel, and her pace steady, and her breathing even. And the man looked away because nothing about her movement announced itself as a threat, and that was the entire point. Raphael was talking. She could hear him laying out the transfer sequence he wanted. Specific accounts, specific instruments, the architecture of a plan he had been building for years, articulated now with the calm satisfaction of a man who believes he has finally arrived at the moment everything pays off. Dante was responding in the measured, cooperative tone of a man buying time, asking clarifying questions, making Raphael feel the conversation was going his way. She reached the communications panel. It was a relay hub. She had identified the model when they walked in, a commercial network relay with a manual override she recognized because the retired locksmith who taught her to pick locks had also, in his methodical way, taught her about security systems, about the ways buildings were wired, about the specific vulnerabilities of equipment that was built for reliability rather than resistance to physical interference. She did not need to destroy it. Destroying it would take too long and make too much noise. She needed to isolate it. Cut the outbound relay while leaving the inbound feeds active, so Raphael's monitoring screen stayed live, and he didn't immediately know. The tool in her pocket was a small flathead. She had taken it from the warehouse table, because tools were useful, and she had stopped apologizing for the habit of taking what might be useful. She opened the relay panel's access cover, 1 flathead screw, quarter turn, and looked at the internal layout, and found the outbound relay card in the 2nd slot from the left, which was where it was on every unit of this model she had ever seen, and she pulled it. 12 seconds. Start to finish. She closed the access cover and stepped back from the wall and put the relay card in her jacket pocket next to the flathead. Raphael's voice behind her. "And the property instruments can follow in the morning. I'm not unreasonable about the timeline." She turned and walked back toward the center of the room and caught Dante's eye and gave him the smallest nod she had in her inventory. He saw it. "Raphael," Dante said, and his voice had changed, the cooperative tone gone, something underneath it surfacing. "The order you just sent to the men outside that car." Raphael's eyes moved. A micro-shift, barely visible, toward the monitoring screen on the central table. "It didn't go," Dante said. The monitoring screen still showed the live feed. Owen asleep, Reyes at her laptop, the 2 parallel vehicles outside the windows. Raphael looked at the feed and then at his communication station and then at Maris. And the cataloging expression came back, but this time it was running very fast, reassessing everything in the room at once. Dante moved. The distance between them was 8 feet, and he covered it in less than 2 seconds, and Raphael was fast, faster than a man his age had any right to be. But Dante was faster, and the collision between them was not elegant. It was the collision of 2 men who were done with language, who had exhausted the pretense that words were going to resolve what existed between them, and it carried them both into the edge of the central table and then to the floor. The 3 workstation men were moving. The 2 men Dante had brought to the stairwells were through the door before the workstation men had fully cleared their chairs, and the room became a contained chaos that Maris moved through rather than away from, because away from was the wrong direction. She reached the central table. The monitoring screen was still live. She could see the 2 vehicles outside Reyes's car had pulled slightly closer, not on the relay order, which hadn't sent, but on their own judgment, their own timeline. They had a plan that didn't entirely depend on Raphael's signal. Of course they did. Raphael built redundancies. He had been planning this for years. She grabbed the radio handset from the table. She didn't know the frequency. She didn't know the call sign. She pressed transmit and said clearly, "Dr. Reyes, change direction, now, any direction. Do it now, and don't stop." Static. Then, "Who is—" "It's Maris. Drive." On the monitor, she watched the car veer left, sudden and sharp, the kind of turn that comes from a driver who has committed completely. The two parallel vehicles hesitated. A second, 2 seconds, the fractional delay of men waiting for a signal that wasn't coming. And in that gap, Reyes accelerated, and the gap became a distance, and the distance became enough. Behind her, Dante and Raphael were still on the ground, and the sound of it was the sound of two men who had years of specific grievances to work through and very little patience left for anything else. She turned. Raphael had a knife. She didn't see where it came from. It was simply there, the way things appear in the hands of men who have been dangerous for a long time. And Dante's left arm was bleeding, and his face had the lockdown expression of someone managing pain as information rather than experience. And she looked at the two of them, and at the knife, and at the distance between her and the nearest workstation chair, and she did the calculation in under a second. She picked up the chair and she swung it. It caught Raphael across the right shoulder, the knife shoulder, and the knife skittered across the floor, and Dante got his arm around Raphael's throat from behind and held. And the room went still in the way rooms go still when the central conflict has resolved, and everyone still standing is waiting to understand what that means. Raphael stopped moving after 7 seconds. Not unconscious, controlled. A man who understood the arithmetic of the current situation and was capable of accepting it temporarily while he recalculated. Dante held on for another 3 seconds anyway. Then he stood, pulling Raphael up with him, and looked at Maris over Raphael's shoulder with the expression of a man who is going to have a great deal to say later, and is filing all of it away for when later exists. His left arm was bleeding steadily. She looked at it. He shook his head slightly. Not now, not important, and she accepted that and looked at the monitoring screen instead. The car was gone from frame. Reyes had moved it out of the camera's coverage area, which meant she had moved it a significant distance, which meant Owen was farther from this building than he had been 2 minutes ago. Farther was enough for right now. Farther was everything. Marco appeared in the doorway from the stairwell, breathing hard, the laptop bag over his shoulder. He took in the room in one sweep. Reyes confirmed. She's clear. Owen's clear. He looked at Raphael, then at the knife on the floor, then at Maris and the chair she was still holding. He didn't say anything about the chair. He was a professional. "The asset transfers," Dante said. His voice was steady despite the arm. "Initiate now." Marco pulled out his phone. Dante looked at Raphael. Raphael looked back at him with the expression of a man watching something he built for a decade begin to come apart. And whatever was in that expression, it was not what she expected. It was not rage. It was not desperation. It was almost relief. She filed that away. Whatever it meant, whatever complicated and ugly truth lived underneath Raphael Orsini's decade of methodical destruction, she was not going to understand it tonight. Tonight was not for understanding. Tonight was for the 11 minutes it took Marco's transfers to complete, and for the bleeding in Dante's arm to be dealt with, and for the moment, still 4 blocks away, still moving, still safe, when she would see Owen's face again. 11 minutes. She had been waiting 7 years. She could manage 11 minutes. The 11 minutes passed the way the worst minutes always pass. Not quickly, not slowly, but with the specific grinding texture of time that knows it is being watched. Marco stood at the folding table with his phone in one hand and his laptop open in front of him, reading transfer confirmations as they came through in batches, his voice low and steady as he called them out. Accounts cleared. Property instruments initiated. Offshore structures redirected. The financial architecture that Raphael had spent a decade trying to reach, dissolving out of his grasp in real time, confirmation by confirmation, like water finding its level through cracks he hadn't known existed. Raphael sat in a chair against the north wall with his hands zip-tied in front of him, and 2 of Dante's men standing close enough that movement was theoretical rather than practical. He watched Marco work. His face had settled into something that Maris kept returning to against her better judgment, that expression she had catalogued in the moment after Dante got his arm around his throat. Not rage, not desperation. Something that looked uncomfortably, like a man being relieved of a weight. Dante was at the window with a field dressing on his left arm that one of his men had applied with practiced efficiency, watching the street below. He had not spoken since the transfers began. He stood with his back to the room and his weight slightly favored to the right, and she could see from across the space the particular quality of his stillness. Not calm, not rest, but the stillness of a man who has been moving very hard for a very long time and has finally stopped and is now experiencing the full cost of everything the movement had been holding back. At minute 9, Marco said, "Reyes is 3 blocks out. Owen is with her." Dante turned from the window. He didn't say anything. He looked at Maris, and she looked at him, and neither of them needed to perform anything about what that information meant. At minute 11, Marco said, "Complete." The words sat in the room. Raphael closed his eyes, just for a moment. Then he opened them and looked at nothing in particular, and Maris watched him do it, and thought about the 11-year-old version of Raphael Orsini that had never existed in any story she'd been told. The origin she didn't have, the wound she couldn't see, the thing that turns a man into someone who looks at a 7-year-old child through a school gate and sees an instrument. She thought about it, and then she let it go, because understanding was not the same as forgiveness, and she was not in the business of forgiveness tonight. The car arrived on the street below 4 minutes later. Maris was already at the building's main entrance when it pulled up, and the rear door opened and Owen came out of it at a speed that suggested he had been physically restrained from exiting the vehicle for some time and had finally been released. He hit her at full speed, both arms around her waist, his face pressed into her side, and she went down onto one knee on the pavement and held him with both arms, and felt the particular quality of his breathing, fast, ragged, the breathing of a child who has been very brave for a very long time in a moving car with a stranger, and has now used up every reserve of brave he had. "I'm here," she said into his hair. "I've got you. I'm here." He didn't say anything for a long moment, then muffled against her jacket. "Dr. Reyes drives really fast." "I know. She did good." She was scared. She was. She did it anyway. Owen pulled back far enough to look at her face. He mawed the inventory, eyes, expression, the field dressing visible on her hands where she'd scraped them on the relay panel. And his jaw tightened in a way she recognized because she had seen it in the mirror for 7 years. "You're hurt," he said. "Scrapes. Nothing serious." "You said you'd be okay." "I am okay." He looked at her hands again. He was 7 years old and he was deciding whether to accept this, and she watched him decide and loved him so completely in that moment that it was almost unbearable. "Okay," he said. He leaned back into her. She held on. Dante came out of the building behind her and stopped on the step. She felt rather than heard him. The change in the air, the particular quality of his attention landing on the two of them on the pavement. She did not turn around. She was not ready to manage that yet. She needed another 30 seconds of just this, just Owen against her, just the cold air and the smell of the street and the simple physical fact of her son being whole. She heard Owen's breathing change. She felt him turn his head. She knew without looking that he was looking at Dante. "Hey," Owen said. Dante's voice behind her was very careful. "Hey, your arm looks worse than my mom's hands." "Yeah, probably." "Does it hurt?" A pause. "Yeah." "My mom has bandages," Owen said. "She has a lot of them." It was exactly what he had said in the bakery, in what felt like a different lifetime, holding out half a piece of brioche to a bleeding stranger. The repetition of it, the complete guileless consistency of a 7-year-old who had determined early on that the correct response to a hurt person was to offer what you had, was the thing that finally broke something open in Maris's chest that she had been keeping closed all night. She pressed her face into Owen's hair and breathed and did not cry, because crying was for later, for a private room, for a moment without witnesses. She had learned that a long time ago, but it was close. They spent the remainder of the night in a hotel, not a property connected to the organization, but an ordinary commercial hotel in a neighborhood far enough from Mercer Heights that the specific geography of the last 24 hours felt like a different city. Marco booked 3 rooms under names she didn't ask about. Owen was asleep before his head touched the pillow, deeply and immediately, in the way of children who have decided they are finally safe. Maris sat on the edge of the bed next to him and watched him sleep for a long time. Then she went to the door that connected her room to the adjacent one. She had noted it when they checked in, the standard connecting door of commercial hotels. the kind that required both sides to unlock. And she knocked. Dante opened it. He had changed. Someone had brought a bag, she didn't know when, and the field dressing on his arm had been replaced with something more substantial, and he looked like a man who had washed his face and was now standing in the quiet aftermath of something large and trying to locate himself in it. She looked at him for a moment. He looked at her. "Come in," he said, "or I can come out there." "Here is fine." She stepped through the connecting door and sat in the chair by the window, and he sat on the edge of the bed because that was what the room offered, and they were both past the point of managing optics. "Tell me about your father," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "What part?" "The part where he was building a federal case." Another pause. Longer. "I've been sitting with that for the last hour." He looked at his hands. The left one was stiff from the wound, and he flexed it carefully, testing the range. "I don't know if it's true. Raphael is—" He stopped. "Raphael has always understood that the most effective lies are the ones that contain the largest percentage of truth. So I don't know. What I know is that my father transferred the assets. I know he encoded them. I know he chose a method that was designed to live inside a family, inside a person he trusted." He looked up. He knew about Owen. She went still. "The melody," Dante said. "He wrote it for my mother. But the encoding, you said the variations, the two versions you developed over the years of singing it, those variations contained separate data sets. Reyes confirmed it when I called her an hour ago." He held her gaze. "The base melody encodes the primary asset locations. The first variation encodes the offshore instruments. The second variation, the one you told me you started doing when Owen was about 2, when he was old enough to respond to the changes in the melody." He paused. "The second variation encodes a name, a single name repeated through the interval structure carried in the spacing of the notes." She already knew what name. She could feel it arriving before he said it. "Owen," Dante said. "My father knew. He found out somehow. I don't know when, I don't know how, but he found out that you were alive and that Owen existed, and he put his name into the encoding. Not as a key, not as data." His voice was controlled, but the control was the kind that cost something. "As a record, evidence that he knew, that he chose to protect him by hiding the assets in something only Owen's mother could carry." He stopped. He was dying when he did this. He had been diagnosed 14 months before he died. He knew he was running out of time, and he knew Raphael was moving, and he did the only thing he could think of. She looked out the window. The city was beginning to gray at the edges, the specific pre-dawn light that she knew better than any other, because she had been meeting it at 4 in the morning for 7 years. "He trusted me," she said. "He didn't know me. He trusted that you had chosen someone worth trusting." Dante said nothing. She didn't need him to. They sat in the quiet of that for a while. Outside, a truck moved through the street below. Someone's alarm went off in a room down the hall and was silenced quickly. The city doing what cities do, continuing indifferently, while the people inside it tried to reassemble themselves. "What happens to Raphael?" she said. "He'll stand for what he did. There are federal contacts who are not compromised, real ones I've maintained separately from the organizational structure. The documentation Marco pulled from the servers tonight is enough to support multiple charges." He paused. "It'll take time. These things always take time. But he won't be in a position to reach you or Owen. I'll make certain of that." "Not just certain, permanent." "Yes, permanent." She looked at him. "And the organization." I was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that has a decision inside it. "My father may have been trying to dismantle it," he said slowly. "I've spent my whole life inside it. I don't know how to evaluate that from the inside, whether it's something worth preserving in a different form or something that needs to be finished. But what I know is—" He stopped, started again. "I know that I have a son, and I know that the thing my son is going to ask me when he's old enough to ask it clearly is, what did you do with it? What did you build? And I need to be able to answer that." It was the most honest thing she had heard him say all night, which was saying something because the night had been full of honesty of the most brutal and unwelcome kind. "He's going to ask you a lot of things," she said. "I know. He asks a lot of things now. He doesn't stop." Dante looked at the connecting door, at the room beyond it, the sleeping child. Something in his face did the quiet recalibration she had been watching all night. the thing that happened every time Owen entered his awareness. What kind of things? Currently, why the sky looks different colors at different times of day, whether fish sleep, why some people are mean, why bread rises. She paused. Last week he asked me why some families only have one parent. The room was very still. What did you tell him? Dante said. I told him that families come in all configurations, and what makes a family isn't the number of people, but whether the people in it show up for each other. She looked at her hands. The scrapes from the relay panel had dried to dark lines across her knuckles. Owen carried in the first tray of sourdough from the oven and set it on the rack with the careful pride of a child who has been trusted with something hot and knows it. Perfect, Maris said. I know, he said, with the total absence of false modesty that she had given up trying to correct because it was accurate, and he knew it was accurate, and she had raised him to know the difference between arrogance and honest assessment. Dante arrived before the first customer. He always did. He came through the front door at 4:15 with his coat damp from whatever the weather was doing and went directly to the prep table and put on the apron she had started leaving on the hook beside the door without acknowledging that she was leaving it there, because some things were better established through action than discussion. Owen, who had positioned himself at the far end of the prep table with a small bowl of his own and a portion of dough. He was not technically supposed to be working yet, watched Dante settle in beside Maris with the evaluative attention he applied to most things. You're late, Owen said. She starts at 4. I know, traffic. You don't drive. Marco drives. Marco was in traffic. Owen considered this. He looked at Maris. She kept her eyes on the dough and did not help either of them. Fine, Owen said, and went back to his bowl. Dante looked at the side of Maris's face. She could feel him looking. She let it go on for a few seconds, and then she said, without turning, He's going to hold that over you. I know. He holds everything over everyone. He gets it from you. I've been here 3 months. Apparently it's fast acting. She passed him the bench scraper. Left side needs shaping. He took the bench scraper and worked the left side of the dough. And outside on Callan Street, the city was doing what it did before sunrise. The trucks, the early walkers, the particular pre-dawn quiet that is not actually quiet if you've spent enough years inside it to learn its specific vocabulary. The oven timer went off. Owen went for it. Careful, Maris and Dante said simultaneously in the same register. Owen stopped. He looked at both of them with the gray eyes that were his own and no one else's, and also, undeniably, evidence of a lineage that stretched back through men she had never met, and a lullaby she had carried without knowing what it carried. I know, Owen said, with the patience of a child who has been told to be careful all his life and has accepted it as the texture of being loved. I know how to be careful. He got the tray. He brought it to the rack. He set it down without incident and looked at both of them with an expression that said, See? Maris looked at Dante. Dante looked at her. She turned back to the dough. Dante turned back to the dough. The kitchen was warm and it smelled the way it always smelled at this hour, and outside the window the sky was beginning to change colors. That first almost imperceptible shift from black to something else. The specific moment she had watched alone for 7 years without, until recently, anyone to point it out to. The sky's different, Owen said, looking at the window. Why does it do that? Because the light is changing, Maris said. But why does it change that color specifically? Why not just go from dark to light? Because there's a transition. Things don't just jump from one state to another. Owen thought about this.